You ever realize your marriage ended in a room full of people smiling at you? I didn't raise my voice when I said it. I didn't need to. The music was already too loud, the glasses too full, the laughter too easy. My 40th birthday party sat 20 floors above Manhattan, wrapped in glass and city lights. The kind of place where people measure success in square footage and stock tickers. Olivia planned it all. Every detail perfect. Every guest curated. Hedge fund managers, analysts, traders, the kind of men who spoke in numbers and smiled like they owned tomorrow. And somewhere between the champagne and the skyline, I realized I didn't belong in my own life anymore. She stood across the room, radiant in a black dress that caught the light just enough to keep eyes on her. One hand resting on a man's arm. Not mine. Never mind tonight. His name was Tyler Grant. 32. Fast money. Faster mouth. The kind of guy who mistakes momentum for power. I watched him lean in, whisper something into Olivia's ear. She laughed. Not polite. Not careful. Real laughter. The kind I hadn't heard from her in years. I took a sip of my bourbon. It tasted like oak and something colder. Around me, conversations blurred into a low hum. Deals being hinted at. Alliances forming over crystal glasses and quiet arrogance. Someone clapped me on the shoulder. Hell of a party, Mike, he said, already looking past me. I nodded. Of course it was. Olivia doesn't do anything halfway. That's what people admired about her. What they didn't see was what it cost. The room shifted when she tapped her glass. A soft chime, but it cut through everything. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. She smiled, stepping into the center like she'd done it 1,000 times. Because she had. Everyone, she said, voice smooth, practiced, effortless. Thank you for coming tonight. Her eyes scanned the room, not looking for me. Not once. This night means a lot, she continued, pausing just long enough to own the silence. Tyler stood beside her now, hand casually in his pocket, like he belonged there. Like he'd always been there. I leaned back against the bar, letting the distance settle in. You learn a lot when you stop trying to be seen. You notice the angles, the glances, the way people reveal themselves when they think you don't matter. Olivia raised her glass again. And of course, she said, a faint smile playing on her lips. We're here to celebrate Michael. A few polite laughs. A ripple of applause. I didn't move. Didn't nod. Didn't acknowledge it. Because something in her tone felt off. Like a line delivered too clean. My husband, she added. And for the first time, she looked at me. Not warm. Not proud. Measured. Like she was introducing a concept, not a man. The room waited. You could feel it. That subtle tension before a joke lands. Before a story shifts. I set my glass down slowly, fingers steady, heartbeat calm in a way that should have worried me more than anger ever could. Because I'd been angry before. This wasn't that. This was clarity. And clarity doesn't shout. It waits. Olivia tilted her head slightly, smile sharpening just enough to cut. He's always been consistent, she said. Laughter. Light. Easy. Encouraged. The kind of man who prefers staying out of the spotlight. More laughter. Tyler smirked beside her, glancing toward me like I was part of the entertainment. I let it happen. Let every word land exactly where it was meant to. Because sometimes, the best thing you can do is let people show you exactly who they are. And tonight, in a room full of power, money, and polished smiles, my wife decided to show everyone exactly what she thought I was. And I decided. I was done correcting her. The laughter did not stop when she finished speaking. It settled into the room like something accepted, something agreed upon. And that was the part most people never understand. Disrespect is rarely loud when it is real. It is quiet, polished, dressed up as humor, so no one has to feel guilty for enjoying it. I kept my expression neutral, shoulders relaxed, hands resting lightly against the bar like none of it reached me. Because control is not about what you feel, it is about what you allow others to see. And tonight, I was done giving them anything real. Olivia continued, building on the moment, her voice smooth, confident, the kind that wins rooms before facts ever enter the conversation. She talked about ambition, about drive, about what it takes to survive in a place like New York where everything costs more than it should, and then she glanced at me again, just a fraction too long, just enough to make sure everyone followed her eyes. Not everyone is built for that pace, she said, and the room responded exactly how she expected, soft laughter, nods, agreement disguised as politeness. Tyler leaned in slightly, swirling his drink like he owned the air around him. Some people get comfortable, he added, not even looking at me when he said it, which made it worse, because dismissal always cuts deeper than direct insult. I could feel a few eyes flick toward me, measuring, curious, trying to match the man in front of them with the version of me they had already accepted, the quiet husband, the background figure, the man who shows up but does not matter. And I let them. I let every assumption settle, every narrative lock into place, because the truth does not need to interrupt when it knows its time is coming. I picked up my glass again, took a slow sip, and watched the reflection of the room ripple across the amber. Liquid, distorted but honest in a way people are not. You learn something after years of building things no one sees. Power does not announce itself. It waits until it is undeniable. Olivia stepped closer to Tyler now, not touching, not crossing any obvious line, but close enough to send a message to anyone paying attention, and I saw the shift in the room. Subtle, but real. Alliances form in moments like that. People attach themselves to what they believe is rising and distance themselves from what they believe is already behind. One of the junior analysts laughed a little too loudly, trying to align himself with the energy. Another man checked his phone, uninterested now that the hierarchy felt clear, and through all of it, I stayed exactly where I was, unmoved, unbothered on the surface, because reacting would have given them what they wanted, confirmation, validation, proof that I was exactly what they thought. Instead, I let silence do the work. I let the absence of reaction create a space they could not quite read. Confusion is a quiet kind of power. Olivia finished her speech with a toast. Something clean, something forgettable, the kind of words that sound important but leave no mark. Glasses lifted, voices echoed, and for a moment the room reset. Back to networking, back to deals. Back to pretending this was just another perfect night. But something had already shifted, something irreversible, because once respect leaves a room, it does not come back the same way. I set my glass down carefully, adjusted my cuff, and took one step away from the bar, not toward them, not toward her, but toward the exit. And that was the first move no one noticed, which made it the most important one of all. Because the moment you stop trying to belong somewhere, you start seeing exactly how small that place really is. And as I walked past the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretched out beneath me, endless, indifferent, full of opportunities that did not care about parties or opinions or laughter, and I realized something simple, something final. I was not losing anything by leaving that room. I was just deciding to take back what was already mine. I did not rush to the elevator. That would have been too obvious, too emotional, and emotion is expensive in rooms like that. Instead, I walked at a pace that matched the night, measured, unhurried, like a man stepping out for air, not a man stepping out of his own life. The hallway outside the penthouse was quieter, softer, the kind of silence that reminds you how loud the performance behind you really was. And for the first time that night, I let the mask slip just enough to breathe, not anger, not even sadness, just a clear, cold awareness settling in, the kind that does not ask questions anymore, the kind that already knows the answers. I reached the elevator and pressed the button once. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Because hesitation belongs to people who still believe something can be fixed, and I was past that. The doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped inside alone. Mirrored walls reflecting a version of me the room upstairs never bothered to see. Calm, composed, unchanged on the surface. But something underneath had already shifted, something final. As the elevator descended, floor numbers counting down in quiet red light, I thought about how long it had been building. Not tonight. Not even this year, but slowly, in small moments no one ever notices until they add up to something irreversible. The missed conversations, the polite distance, the way respect fades before love ever admits it is gone. People think betrayal is loud, dramatic, obvious, but most of the time it is subtle, layered, wrapped in smiles and reasonable excuses until one day it stops pretending. And tonight it stopped pretending. The doors opened into the lobby. Marble floors, low lighting, the faint hum of late evening traffic filtering in from outside. A concierge nodded as I passed. The same polite acknowledgement he had given me 100 times before. Nothing about me had changed to him. And that was the point. Most people only see what is presented, not what is real. I stepped out onto the street, and the air hit different, cooler, sharper. New York at night does not care about your problems. It keeps moving, taxis sliding past, distant sirens, conversations overlapping in fragments, life continuing without pause. And for the first time that night, I felt something close to relief, not because I had lost something, but because I had finally stopped holding on to it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, the screen lighting up with notifications from the party, messages, missed calls, people trying to stay connected to whatever they believed I still represented. I ignored all of them, not out of anger, but because none of them mattered anymore. Instead, I opened a different thread, one that had not been touched in years, a single name at the top, Daniel Reeves. I stared at it for a second, remembering the last time we spoke, the last time I chose to step back, to let things run without me, to trust structures instead of presence, and how that decision had shaped everything that followed. My thumb hovered for a moment, not from doubt, but from precision, because timing matters more than intent. Then I typed 4 words, simple, direct, impossible to misunderstand. Initiate full review. Tonight. I hit send and slipped the phone back into my pocket. No dramatic pause. No need to wait for a response, because I already knew what would happen next. Systems do not hesitate. They execute. And somewhere, not in that room, not in that building, but across networks and offices and accounts tied together in ways most people never see, something had just started moving. I looked up at the skyline, glass towers reflecting each other like mirrors of ambition, and realized something most of them never will. Power is not about being seen in the room. It is about deciding what happens after you leave it. The response did not come through as a notification. It came as a shift, subtle at first, the kind you only notice if you know where to look. I started walking without a destination, hands in my coat pockets, blending into the rhythm of the city, while something much larger than this street was already beginning to move across Midtown. Inside a glass tower most people would recognize but never understand. Lights were still on in offices that never truly closed, analysts finishing reports, associates chasing numbers, partners watching markets that never really sleep. And somewhere on the 38th floor, a phone vibrated once on a desk that had not been empty in over 20 years. Daniel Reeves did not ignore calls like that. He never had. He glanced at the screen, read the message once, then again, not because he did not understand it, but because he knew exactly what it meant. He stood up without urgency, the kind of calm that only comes from experience, and reached for his jacket. No hesitation, no questions, because when I say move, he moves. That has always been the agreement. Back on the street, I crossed toward Park Avenue, the glow of traffic lights reflecting off polished black cars and rain-slick pavement, and I could feel it now, not physically, but structurally, like tension being pulled through wires you cannot see, systems waking up, access points opening, permissions shifting, people who thought they understood the game about to realize they were only ever playing on the surface. I passed a storefront window and caught my reflection again. Same man, same posture, nothing dramatic, because real change does not need an audience, it just needs execution. My phone stayed silent, and that was exactly how it was supposed to be. No updates, no confirmations, just action happening where it needed to happen. I turned the corner and stopped briefly at the curb, watching a black sedan glide past, the city moving like it always does, unaware of the small decisions that rewrite entire structures overnight. And I thought about Olivia, still upstairs, still smiling, still believing the version of reality she had constructed in that room, where influence is measured in attention and status is reinforced by laughter. She believed she was winning because no one challenged her, because I did not interrupt, because silence looks like weakness to people who have never learned how to use it. But silence is not absence, it is patience, and patience, when backed by the right leverage, becomes inevitability. Somewhere behind me, far above the street, her phone would start to light up soon. Messages that did not feel the same, tones that shifted, conversations that no longer followed her script. Not dramatic, not immediate, just enough to introduce doubt. And doubt is where control begins to slip. I stepped off the curb and continued walking, blending into the flow of people heading home, heading somewhere, heading nowhere. It did not matter, because my direction had already been decided the moment I sent that message, and everything after that was just timing. People think power is loud. that it announces itself with declarations and visible change, but real power is quiet. It moves in the background, adjusting things so precisely that by the time anyone notices, it is already too late to respond. I adjusted my coat slightly against the night air and kept moving forward, not looking back, not checking my phone, because I did not need confirmation. I had built systems that confirmed themselves, and somewhere, not in the spotlight, not in that penthouse, but in the infrastructure that supports everything they think they control, the first pieces were already falling into place. By the time I reached the next block, the first ripple had already begun, not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle fracture in the illusion Olivia had been standing on all night. Back upstairs the music was still playing, glasses still clinking, conversations still flowing, but beneath that surface something had shifted. Tyler was the first to notice it, not because he was perceptive, but because men like him rely on momentum. And the moment momentum hesitates, they feel it immediately. His phone buzzed once in his hand. A quick glance, a slight pause, barely noticeable to anyone who was not looking for it. Olivia caught it though, just a flicker of her eyes, a question forming behind her smile. "Everything okay?" she asked. Light, casual, still in control. Tyler nodded quickly. Too quickly. "Yeah, just work," he said, but his tone had lost that effortless edge, that quiet arrogance starting to thin at the edges. Across the room another phone lit up, then another, small interruptions spreading like a pattern no one had planned. One of the senior analysts stepped aside, reading something twice before excusing himself without explanation. A managing director checked his watch, then his phone, then walked toward the balcony with a seriousness that did not match the party. Olivia felt it now, not understanding, but sensing, because control is not just about power. It is about predictability, and for the first time that night, things were no longer moving according to her script. She laughed again, louder this time, trying to pull the room back, trying to reset the tone, but laughter that is forced always lands differently. It echoes instead of connects. Tyler's phone buzzed again, longer this time. A call. He stepped slightly away, answering under his breath, but his expression changed within seconds, confidence replaced by confusion, then by something closer to concern. "What do you mean paused?" he said quietly, turning his back slightly to the room. Olivia watched him now, fully aware something was wrong, but not yet understanding the scale of it. Because people like her never expect the foundation itself to move. They only prepare for surface conflicts, the visible ones, the ones they can manage. But this was not visible yet. This was structural. One of her colleagues approached her, lowering his voice. "Olivia, have you seen this?" he asked, showing her his screen, numbers, alerts, internal messages that did not belong at a party. Her smile faded just a fraction, just enough for someone paying attention to notice. "It is probably nothing," she said, but her eyes stayed on the screen a second too long, because deep down she already knew, nothing like this happens without a reason, and reasons like this do not come from nowhere. Across the room conversations began to split, not stopping, but fragmenting, people stepping aside, forming smaller circles, voices lowering, attention shifting away from her. And that was the first real loss, not money, not status, but attention, because in her world, attention is currency, and she could feel it slipping through her fingers without understanding why. Tyler ended his call, walking back toward her, but the man returning was not the same one who had been standing beside her minutes ago, his posture tighter, his expression guarded. "I need to step out for a minute," he said, not asking, not explaining, just stating. And that was when it hit her, not fully, not clearly, but enough to create that first crack in certainty, because powerful people do not leave rooms like that without reason, and whatever that reason was, it was bigger than the party, bigger than her, and somewhere far below, on a street that no longer mattered to that room. I kept walking, knowing that the moment had already passed the point of return, because once doubt enters the system, it does not ask for permission to grow, it simply does. Upstairs, the room was no longer holding together the way it had just minutes ago. It had not collapsed, not yet, but the cohesion was gone, replaced by something thinner, something unstable. Conversations that used to overlap now separated into guarded exchanges, voices lowered, eyes distracted. Olivia stood in the center of it all, still composed on the surface, still holding her glass like nothing had changed. But her attention was no longer on the room. It was on the crack spreading. Through it, Tyler had not come back. That alone was enough to shift the balance. Because men like him do not disappear in the middle of a moment they believe they own, not unless something forces them to. Her phone vibrated in her hand, once, then again, then continuously, messages stacking faster than she could read them. Internal threads, flagged alerts, names she recognized reaching out with a tone that did not match celebration. She opened one message, then another, scanning quickly, her eyes narrowing just slightly. Numbers frozen, transactions under review, access temporarily restricted, language that sounded procedural but carried weight if you understood it. And Olivia did understand it. Not fully, not yet, but enough to feel the ground shift beneath her. One of the partners approached her again, this time without the casual tone. "This is spreading," he said quietly, not asking, not speculating, stating, because whatever this was, it was not isolated. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself. "It is probably a system issue," she replied, but even as she said it, she knew that systems like theirs do not fail all at once, not across multiple channels, not in patterns like this. Across the room more people were stepping away, some already leaving, offering quick excuses that did not match their urgency, coats being collected, rides being called, the party dissolving not with a crash, but with a quiet unraveling. And that was worse, because there was no single moment to fix, no single problem to address, just a growing absence where certainty used to be. Olivia moved toward the balcony, needing space, needing perspective, the city stretching out in front of her like it always did, constant, indifferent, but tonight it felt different, like it was watching instead of existing. Her phone rang, a direct call this time. She answered immediately. "What is going on?" she asked, her voice controlled but sharper now. On the other end, a pause, then a response that did not give her what she wanted. "We are trying to understand it," the voice said, careful, measured, which meant they were not in control either. And that was the moment the uncertainty became real. Because when the people who are supposed to have answers start choosing their words, you know something bigger is in play. She ended the call without resolution, lowering the phone slowly, her reflection faint in the glass in front of her, composed, but no longer certain. And behind her the room continued to thin, the energy gone, replaced by something colder, more cautious. Conversations no longer about deals or opportunity, but about exposure, risk, positioning, the language of people adjusting to a shift they cannot yet see. And through all of it, one question began to surface, unspoken but present. What changed? Olivia turned slightly, scanning the room again, and for the first time that night, her eyes searched for me, not out of habit, not out of performance, but out of something closer to realization. But I was not there, and that absence carried more weight than anything I could have said. Because sometimes the most powerful move is not what you do in the room. It is what happens after you leave it, and somewhere beyond her reach, beyond that penthouse, beyond the assumptions she had built her confidence on, the structure she believed she understood was being rewritten in real time, one decision at a time, by someone she had already decided did not matter. By now, the room no longer resembled a celebration. It had become a quiet assessment zone, the kind of environment where people stop performing and start calculating. Olivia could feel it in the way no one was looking directly at her anymore, not out of respect, but out of distance. Because when uncertainty enters a room like that, proximity becomes a risk. Her phone buzzed again. Another call. This one she recognized instantly. Senior partner, the kind of man who never calls unless something is already wrong. She answered before it could ring twice. "Tell me this is temporary," she said, not asking for information, asking for reassurance. But the silence on the other end lasted just a second too long. "We are seeing coordinated holds," he said finally. Voice lower than usual, careful, controlled. "Multiple accounts, multiple channels. It is not random." Olivia turned slightly, stepping further away from the remaining guests, her reflection in the glass now sharper, more isolated. "Who initiated it?" she asked. And that was the question that mattered, because systems do not move like this without authority, without access that bypasses layers most people never even know exist. Another pause, longer this time. "We are still tracing the origin," he said, but she heard what he did not say. They did not have control, Not over this. Not right now. And that realization landed differently than anything else that night. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just heavy. Settling into her posture. Tightening her grip on the phone just enough to show something had shifted inside. Behind her the room had thinned to half its size. Maybe less. Conversations reduced to clusters of 2 or 3. No laughter now. No energy. Just quiet exchanges and quick exits. People protecting themselves from something they could not yet define. Olivia ended the call slowly, lowering the phone and staring out at the skyline. But she was not seeing the city anymore. She was replaying the night, step by step, searching for the moment this started, because things like this do not happen without a trigger, and that was when it surfaced, not clearly, not fully, but enough to connect, the timing, the shift, the exact moment the room changed. It was not when the phones started buzzing. It was before that, when I walked away, when I said nothing, when I chose not to react. Her expression tightened slightly. Not fear, not yet, but recognition. The kind that comes when a pattern finally aligns. She turned back toward the room, scanning it again. But now she was not looking for validation. She was looking for absence, confirming what she already knew. I was gone, and in that absence, something else became visible. The assumptions she had built about me, about control, about who held power and who did not. They no longer fit the reality unfolding around her. One of the remaining executives approached cautiously. Olivia, people are asking questions, he said, not confrontational, but concerned, because in environments like that, questions are the first sign of a shifting hierarchy. She nodded once, slow, controlled, but her mind was no longer on the room. It was somewhere else entirely, connecting dots, recalibrating, understanding that whatever was happening was not external, not random, but intentional, structured, precise, and that narrowed the possibilities in a way she could not ignore, because there are not many people who can move systems like that, not many who have the reach, the access, the authority to initiate something this coordinated without warning. And for the first time that night, the narrative she had been controlling began to turn against her, not in words, not in confrontation, but in realization, because the most dangerous moment is not when you lose control, it is when you realize you never actually had it. And as that thought settled in, quiet but undeniable, Olivia finally understood something she had dismissed for years. The man she laughed at, the man she reduced to background, the man she believed had no place in her world, might have been the one who built the entire stage she was standing on. By the time Olivia stepped back into the center of the room, there was no center left, just fragments of what used to be a controlled environment. People who had once orbited her now standing at angles, detached, calculating their next move instead of reinforcing hers. She could feel it in the silence between conversations, in the way eye contact broke a second too early, in the way no one laughed anymore unless it was necessary. Her phone buzzed again, this time not a call, but a message, marked urgent. Internal system notice, restricted access escalated to executive review, and beneath it, a line that did not belong in her world unless something had gone very wrong. Ownership verification required. She stared at it for a second longer than she should have, reading it again as if the words might change, because ownership is not something questioned lightly in structures like theirs. It is defined, documented, locked. And yet here it was, shifting under her feet. She turned slightly, scanning the remaining faces, searching not for support now, but for information, for someone who knew more than she did. But what she found instead was distance, quiet, careful distance. One of the partners approached again, slower this time, measured. Olivia, there is talk that this is not internal, he said, choosing each word like it mattered, because it did. It is coming from above, he added, and that phrase landed heavier than anything else that night. Above, not within, not lateral, but above, which meant authority she could not override, control she did not possess. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself, but the structure she relied on was no longer responding the way it always had. Her access points were being questioned, her influence was no longer immediate, and that changed everything. Across the room another group quietly gathered their things, no announcements, no goodbyes, just exits, controlled, professional, but final. The party was not ending. It was dissolving, and she could not stop it because she did not understand it. She moved toward the table where her phone had better reception earlier, refreshing the screen, opening threads, scanning updates. And that was when she saw it. Not a message, not a warning, but a name, buried in a chain of authorization logs. One she had not paid attention to in years. One she had dismissed as irrelevant. Michael Hayes. It appeared not as a sender, not as a participant, but as an origin point. A root access identifier tied to structures she had assumed were distributed, neutral, untouchable. Her breath slowed, not from panic, but from realization, because pieces that never connected before were aligning now. The quiet decisions, the absence of interference, the way things had always worked without visible leadership. She had mistaken silence for absence, and that mistake was now rewriting her reality in real time. Behind her someone asked, "Do we need to be concerned?" And for the first time that night, she did not have an answer, not one she could say out loud, because saying it would mean admitting something she had not even fully processed herself, that the man she had reduced to background was not outside the system. He was the system, not in the way people imagine, not as a visible figurehead, but as the underlying authority that does not need recognition to function. Her hand tightened slightly around the phone, not out of fear, but out of recalibration, because everything she thought she controlled was now being redefined, not taken violently, not stripped away in front of her, but quietly reassigned, validated, and locked in ways she could not immediately reverse. And as that understanding settled in, heavy and undeniable, the room around her faded into something secondary, because the real shift was no longer happening there. It was happening in the layers she could not reach, triggered by a man who had already walked away, leaving nothing behind but consequences she was only just beginning to understand. Olivia did not move for a long moment after she saw the name, not because she was frozen, but because movement would have made it real too quickly, and part of her still wanted a different explanation, something external, something fixable, something that did not lead back to the one variable she had already dismissed. But the system does not lie, not at that level, not in logs that trace authority instead of action. She exhaled slowly, steady, controlled, the way you do when you realize that problem is not in front of you. It is underneath you, and by the time you see it, it has already reshaped everything. Around her the last fragments of the night continued to dissolve. Only a handful of guests remained, speaking in low voices that no longer included her. Their attention shifted completely, not toward her, not toward each other, but toward whatever was unfolding beyond the walls of that penthouse. Because that is where real consequences live, not in rooms, but in systems. She lowered her phone slightly, her posture still composed, still holding on to the image she had built for years, but inside something had recalibrated, not panic, not yet, but awareness, sharp and unavoidable, the kind that forces you to re-examine every assumption you have made, every moment you ignored, every signal you dismissed because it did not fit your narrative. She turned slowly, scanning the space one last time. The empty glasses, the half-finished conversations, the absence where there had once been attention, and it hit differently now, not as loss, but as exposure, because everything she thought she controlled had only ever been allowed to function within boundaries she did not define, and those boundaries had just shifted, quietly, completely. She stepped toward the center of the room again, not to reclaim it, but to confirm what she already knew. No one was waiting for her. No one was looking to her for direction. The hierarchy had already adjusted, not publicly, not formally, but internally, where it matters most. Her phone vibrated once more. A final message, short, precise, not emotional, not confrontational, just information. Access privileges updated. Further actions pending review. She read it once, then locked the screen, because there was nothing to respond to, nothing to argue with. This was not a conversation. It was an outcome, and outcomes do not negotiate. Far below, the city continued exactly as it always had, lights stretching into the distance, movement constant, indifferent to personal narratives, and somewhere within that movement, I stood at the edge of the street, watching the reflection of those same lights ripple across dark glass buildings. My phone remained silent. No confirmations, no updates, just the quiet certainty of execution completed as intended. I did not need to check. I did not need to verify, because systems like that do not partially respond. They either hold or they shift, and tonight they shifted. I adjusted my coat slightly, and looked up at the skyline, not with satisfaction, not with anger, just with clarity. Because this was never about proving something to her, never about reacting to a moment in a room. It was about alignment, about correcting a structure that had drifted too far from reality. And sometimes correction does not come with confrontation. It comes with absence, with decisions made quietly, with actions taken where they cannot be interrupted. I turned away from the street and started walking again, not toward anything specific, just forward. Because once you remove yourself from a place that no longer reflects who you are, you do not go back to explain. You move on and let the consequences speak for you. And somewhere high above, in a room that no longer belonged to her the way she thought it did, Olivia finally stood alone, not abandoned, not attacked, just left to face a truth she could no longer ignore, that the man she believed had nothing was the one who had everything all along.